New research finds Britain's field politicians and campaign groups are seeking to inflame rather than resolve cultural conflicts. If you look at social media, you won't be surprised at that finding. The public generally feels shut out of debate on societal change, with fear of asking silly questions and culture of taking offence breeding resentment. Well, Luke Tryl is UK Director of More in Common. They've commissioned this research today. Luke, very good evening to you. In a way, some of your findings aren't very surprising, but they're still rather worrying, aren't they?
Yeah, good evening to you too, and thanks for having me. In some ways, they're not surprising, but in other ways they are, because we hear so much across the press and from politicians and campaigners on the left and right about these so-called culture wars. We decided to go out and speak to members of the public about what they thought about these sort of flashpoint issues, statues, free speech, trans rights. And what came out was that, unlike the way things are often portrayed, actually most Britons are balancers. They're seeking a middle way through these complicated issues. And they think that politicians and campaigners are basically making the process of accepting cultural change. And I should be clear that almost every Briton that we spoke to said that cultural change was something that they welcomed, they reckoned it was part of our heritage. But politicians and campaigners were actually making it harder by how they were approaching these issues. And what really came through from the members of the public that we spoke to is that there's actually a very British way of doing change, of dealing with these issues. And that means not tearing things down or inflaming things, but actually building on the past, being proud of our heritage, but also looking to the future as well. On this whole range of issues, that's what came across. And what Britons are worried about is that in the current debate, the opportunities for them to speak freely, to ask silly questions, to make mistakes are being closed down because either people, and this comes through quite strongly in our polling, are too readily offended these days. And so if someone makes a genuine mistake, they suddenly get shouted down. Or politicians exploit these cultural wedges in order to sort of create division rather than trying to help the country grapple with, what are complex issues, but issues that we've handled time and time again, as you well know, Iain, and have written about. 30 years ago, try telling people that we would have equal marriage in this country, that actually gay relationships would be pretty much normalised. Britain constantly sees cultural change, but the process is made so much harder by partisans on the left and on the right who want to exploit insecurity about change for their own ends.
But there have always been culture wars, haven't there? It's sometimes made out that this is a new phenomenon. In the 1980s, there was I say a similar culture war. There was a very big division between left and right. You look at the issue of nuclear weapons, for example. Sometimes it's good to have division, isn't it, where you can thrash out the arguments. You're never going to come to a conclusion necessarily that everyone will buy into. But if you can't have robust debate, then, we're just going to have some sort of namby-pamby style debate, which is no fun for anybody.
Oh, absolutely. And, that's actually what we're saying in this report, that robust debate, the ability to ask questions, to freely express yourself is really important. When that tips over into people being shouted down, trying to split the country, for instance, into either, statue saviours or people who want to rip statues down, it's just not the way the public are. And I think a big part of it, you won't be surprised to hear this, comes from social media. It's encouraged this new generation of what we call in the report culture war arsonists, people who deliberately seek to sort of set the flames of division. And what we're seeing in this report is actually to our politicians, to campaigners, actually to other groups like schools and workplaces, just take a step back. Think about how you can create that space for people to have robust debate without it tipping over into open conflict. And we only have to look across the pond to see the debate they're having about the insurrection at the Capitol, to see what happens when society can't resolve disagreements through that robust and open debate. We're not the US. We're certainly not as binary as the US. But there's a danger that certain partisans are pushing us in that direction. And that's what the public told us really strongly in this report they want to avoid. They really don't like that sort of open warfare we see in the US. They think we're Britons. Just to give you another example, when we asked Britons what most describes the British approach to culture and change, one gentleman in one of our focus groups said queuing. And everyone else in the focus group nodded and agreed with him. It's that approach to change, which is, in some ways gentle, that builds. As I said, you look at the way that the push for gay equality came about. It was that approach. It started with things like age of consent, moved to civil partnerships, moved to equal marriage. And it brought Britons with them in that process of change.
Aren't you trying to hark back to a golden age that never was?
I don't think I am. And the reason that I don't think I am is because what we're saying in this report comes out of conversations with Britons from across the country. They want this style of, say, robust debate, ability to challenge, ability to, make mistakes and appear a bit ignorant occasionally. But the ability of social media to magnify those conflicts is making it much harder to have those reasoned discussions and debates. But I actually think that if politicians and campaigners decide, actually, lots of these issues are very tricky. Some things are very new to people. I was talking earlier about the issue of people having pronouns in their emails. It's new to a lot of people. Unless you take the time to explain to people, to educate and allow people to, even challenge and ask questions, you're not going to bring them with you. So as much as this report is a lesson for some of those on the right against inflaming culture wars, because you never know when, something that's a winner in the culture war today can be a loser tomorrow, as something like Section 28 should. It's also a message to some of those on the progressive left that change movements are far more successful when they try and bring people with them and create those spaces for discussion, debate, and even disagreement.
Luke, thank you very much for joining us. That's Luke Tryl, UK Director of More in Common.